Great to be chatting to you today, Natalia, in the heart of the capital, Canberra, about modern strategy and leadership. It's been reflecting on the strategy process over the last few months with yourself and the team, and I was really just thinking about working with yourself, your team, the board, and even some of your external stakeholders. Something that's really stood out about your leadership personally is you have this real unique balance of taking a very human and empathy-based approach to open up conversations in a strategy context, glean insights, all those good things. But then you're also able to make those really strong, decisive decisions as a leader and as a CEO when the time comes. And as a leadership and modern strategy conversation, I'm really, really keen to understand a bit more. Has that, looking back on your career to date, do you think that has come to a degree intuitively? And also, have you worked on that yourself as other leaders should over that time?
Look, it's nice to be chatting to you as well. Thinking back, I've always been an enthusiastic person with lots of ideas and energy. And I remember early in my career, the ideas would bubble up. And being a naturally decisive person, I would think, what a great idea, let me run with it. Thankfully, I was too junior to have enough authority to really run with all my ideas. But what trying to run with some of them taught me was that in complex systems, which any organization is, in an environment where you're working with suppliers, customers, often a rich environment, an idea is only as strong as your ability to harness other people's perspectives on its viability. And so every project strengthens through a discussion with a group of intelligent, interested individuals. And when it comes to organizations, which are truly complex beasts, if you want to develop a plan or an idea, if you want to make sure that it has legs and it's real, the only way is to start with an assumption, start with a direction, but then enrich it through conversations with people. And this is one of the reasons why, to me, the open strategy process is a no-brainer. But you do have to work at it, because drafting a strategy on your own is so much easier than drafting it through a process.
Yes,
and yet it's so much better when you draft it with others.
100%. I look back when you first started as a CEO of the AMA, and we had a conversation. I remember you saying you didn't want to go down that traditional closed route of a strategy with perhaps just yourself and the board and a very, very small group of people, because that approach, big assumptions, sort of knowing you don't have all the answers but not admitting that. A lot of organisations and managers can fall into that trap. But you wanted to genuinely open up that conversation, both internally with your staff, your leadership team, the board, and also externally, a lot of the research you'd been doing with your members, doctors, and broader healthcare. I remember you really wanted to genuinely open that up for conversation for a lot of what you're talking about now to glean those insights. Can you tell us a bit more about why you wanted to take that approach as a leader and for the outcome of the organisation?
Look, the Australian Medical Association is an organisation with history that attracts incredibly bright doctors to its leadership role and into its membership. And it has a very powerful, very experienced senior leadership team and staff. And to me, it made so much sense that there will be ideas, concerns, suggestions in that incredibly bright and experienced group of people, that it would be foolish for a CEO, particularly a new CEO, not to tap into those ideas and that potential. So firstly, it's just about the incredible people I have around me in this organization and making the best use of them. Secondly, it's also about the CEO and a new CEO. Everyone knows that when a new CEO comes in, first they go into the office and draft a new strategy. Yes. Second, they fire the senior leadership team and bring their own people in. And third, usually all of that fails within about a 2-year period. I don't want to be one of those leaders. I am working very hard to make sure that what we do with the AMA is meaningful for the doctors who are our members, and it's meaningful for us as an organization. A strategy is that. You have to be strategic. You have to understand your organization to be strategic. And so to me, the process of inquiry, the intellectual effort it takes to understand something you think you might need to change, but change is effortful. And if you don't understand what really works in the organization, if you don't tap into the people capital you've got, you're likely to get it wrong. And, CEOs make big decisions about budgets, about people, about investment and disinvestment. You get those decisions wrong, the next person is going to mop up a big old mess. And I think an iterative strategic process allows you to get it right most of the time because you're tapping into more brains than just your own.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. I think that iterative process, and certainly that was a big part of it, wasn't it? Right from day one, then a number of months of both internal conversations, right from frontline staff, involving them, right through to the board. And as you said, that process of inquiry, an iterative process, do you feel that sometimes leaders probably can jump a bit early to thinking they need to make those big decisions?
Yes.
And that's true. But what I observe from your leadership team, you understand the human dynamic part of it, that you need to have those genuine conversations and input before you make those big decisions. So again, does that come quite intuitively to you, or have you worked on that over time?
I've worked on that over time.
You have.
No, I think I'm. In my younger years, I was a lot more into jumping and doing.
I see.
The fast and quick decision making, and I've learned that it is a speedy but not necessarily an effective path. Yes. And for leadership to be successful, I heard recently the great Jennifer Westacott talk about leadership being a group dynamic. And as CEO, yes, you need to have a view on the direction of an organization, but how you galvanize people around you towards that direction is actually what defines your leadership. Because one person pedaling in one direction is just one person. If you can get a group, 4, 5, 6, this is your senior leadership team, your board, in our case, our council, and effectively our membership and all of our staff, the more people you can have driving in the same direction towards that strategic intent, the more likely you are to succeed with your change efforts.
Yes, yeah, it's a great point, because I've heard you talk a bit about that. It's a big kind of conundrum. Traditional strategy would be, as a leader, you very quickly paint the vision and then you go and sell that message.
Yes.
But opening up the strategy is quite different, isn't it? And I've seen you do that firsthand.
Yes.
As opposed to trying to sell a message, you're opening it up for people to have involvement, to have input, to challenge, to have those robust, healthy conversations. Yes. And I observed that internally, staff, board, and externally, to have those real healthy conversations, so that, as you said, that collective dynamic then is real. There's substance to it. Do you see that kind of selling approach of leadership is nearly had its day, in a sense?
A slightly different perspective to the question. So, as a leader, people hire you to have answers, to solve problems. There is a lot of pressure, particularly on management CEOs, to fix things and fix them quickly. And in a lot of people, you get a sense of insecurity. It feels unsafe to say, yes, you've hired me to answer, fix your problems.
Yes.
But I need to test that the problems are indeed what you think they are. Boards don't always understand the true problems or causes of problems in their organization. So and neither do senior leadership teams. So it feels, I think, challenging from a self-confidence point of view for an executive to say, I'm new, I have some views already based on my prior experience, but I'm open to the fact that I might have the right questions to ask, but I might not yet know the right answers, but I will in time. Now,
that's a brilliant point.
There is a bit of a dynamic there where the boards often judge you on your speed. And, there's nothing like being in a role for 6 months and not yet having a strategy, a shiny strategy to show for your time there. At the same time, speedy in, speedy out is also a phenomenon in CEO roles.
Yeah, I hear you.
So this is not about dawdling. This is about being analytical and surgical in how you approach organizational assessment and development on strategy. But it is about confidence. being confident in your own ability to navigate the initial uncertainty of a new organization, for example, and not covering up your sense of insecurity about not knowing the ropes yet by the need to produce content that actually may be off the mark.
Yeah, that's such an insightful point. I think the way you put it, conscious of asking the right questions as opposed to the answers, but having the confidence to be able to spell out the process. This is the process we're going through, and this is why.
Yes.
Because as you say, so often it's so easy to feel like you've got to have an answer very quickly and jump into something because it feels like you're moving ahead.
Yes.
But as you say, and that collective dynamic piece, as you mentioned, it can really have an impact.
And it's an illusion. This safety in a quick answer is an illusion of safety because the odds are you're jumping very fast to the wrong conclusion. The only caveat I'd put on that is I think there are some CEOs who make a career out of managing organizations in crisis, facing liquidation, etc. There you are hired as a gun just for make quick changes. But I think most of us, on average, manage organizations that might have issues, but they're not at that crisis point. And therefore, an open strategy process is the right way to go, in my opinion.
Yes, I hear you. So when we talk about organisational culture, often culture is compared to strategy. We've heard all those kind of different back and forth conversations. But how do you see, in terms of strategy and culture, and you talked about change management, where do you see the link? Do you see the link as getting even closer now going forward? We see society, organisations, clients, members wanting more transparency around process, around change. Do you see strategy and culture perhaps even getting closer together to have that right end outcome and impact?
Well, I mean, management theory defines culture as people, systems, processes that all work together to make organizations what it is and function in a certain way. And if determining your strategy is one of the most important functional ways, right, of directing your organization, if that process is a closed loop process between 6 to 10 individuals, what message does that send? What message does it send to staff about the value that they bring? Because, organizations have staff at all levels with all experiences and perspectives. And tapping into that potential is important. And if you are trying to foster a culture in which people want and believe that their opinion is heard, and then you don't ask their opinion on the most important document in the organization, I mean, you just made your point moot. So to me, the two things are moving closer. Also true, I think, for senior leadership in a way and board. We know there is, information asymmetry between boards and management. So boards have all the decision-making power, but management has all the information. One would say that a room in which a board makes decision without management is unwise because the people with the information are not in the room. And so again, you're creating something that's half right. It's not that the perspective the board brings is not right. It's just that it's not enriched by the perspective senior leadership team can bring.
So true. What I've observed there with your leadership team, and then bringing in your leadership team into those conversations at a board level. Not every organisation does that. We're seeing a lot more of it. Open strategy is about removing those silos between board understanding and perception, leadership team. What I observed is, you were willing to be transparent there, having some of those collective conversations. And what I observed is that it actually increases understanding, that nuanced understanding that you won't get through a board report as such. You'll only get through a conversation, understanding the human story, the body language behind it. I see that you as a leader do that very well, both from a process and a culture perspective. Do you think that aspect, again, is becoming even more critical because of transparency? People want to be involved and have a level of understanding?
Yeah, I think the reason why I was mentioning it to you is that often organizations complain about issues of trust between senior leadership teams, CEOs, and boards to senior leadership, CEOs, etc. And for me, the strategy development process is a fantastic way to create better understanding and trust between those three levels in organizations that are all critical to driving organizational performance. And in a way, the senior leadership team understanding your capacity as CEO to bring the board to have a strategic discussion and get agreement and get commitment and funding allocation. The boards trust that you are not telling them furfies, but you have your senior leadership team there and they have their own views, but broadly speaking, it's a reinforcing message. And the process by which that collective group develops a strategy and then finalizes it really makes everyone feels more trust. And what oils relationship better than collective trust?
So
and
true.
knowing that going forward, your work is valued because not only are you doing a great job, which I'm sure everyone is, but you're working towards that strategic vision and it's welcome, agreed, and appreciated.
So true. I think we can so often kind of separate those things, can't we? Trust and culture and strategy.
Yes.
But like you put it, they're
Yes.
intertwined. And
Yes.
if you don't see that relationship, you can miss a really big opportunity, can't you?
Yes.
When we look at the way you approach strategy, you spent the time to go and really understand the sector, the industry, of course, your members, doctors, those really big problems that the people that you're working with are trying to solve. We often see people jumping over that phase very quickly or too quickly. Did you find that spending the time and really understanding what those big pillars of problems were?
Yes.
I know you led a lot of that. Did you find that helpful then coming back and making those really, really key decisions?
I'm just mindful, I think generally, how introspective organizations can get. It is very tempting to spend all the time on talking to your own people and in that small group get an echo chamber effect inside your own organization and drinking your own Kool-Aid. One of the expressions I like, Andrew, is it's not good to believe in lies, particularly the lies you tell yourself. Right?
Very true.
And one of the things that happens is organizations have a narrative about themselves, and so do CEOs and boards. And it's so important to test whether you've bought into something that might not be quite real.
Yes.
Or that might have a very different perspective elsewhere. So the Australian Medical Association has an amazing brand. It is well known. It is, I think, second most trusted organization by consumers after Choice, which I think is an amazing achievement. But what people who are involved with the AMA see us as is not the same as key external stakeholders. And we have fantastic reach. We were able to talk to, health minister, we were able to talk to CEOs of very significant organizations, key journalists, and just get their perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, strategy is always meaningful in the context of your broader sector and the broader country effectively. And so without getting an external perspective and validating your own assumptions, you are again forming a view that is very myopic. And I think that if people have the luxury of time and connections, it's a must. And even if you feel really pressured and time is of the essence, or more of a crisis mode,
it often does feel like that, doesn't it?
Still make the effort to do a little bit of investigation and be open and unoffended by what people may have to say. After all, if they tell you that they don't care about you, that tells you something too, or if they provide some criticism, this is their opinion. You're just asking for their opinion, but it certainly enriches your own thinking about the broader context within which your organization functions, and that can only be a good thing for deciding the direction you wish to take.
I hear you. I think not every leader does that, and it does feel comfortable, or actually then goes and asks for that feedback, knowing that some of it will be, very positive, some of it will be constructive, some of it, could be potentially negative for some organisations. But I think being able to do that, and those external stakeholders knowing that it's a genuine, open conversation, and I remember those conversations we had. It was framed around what is the collective problem we're all trying to solve here, as opposed to specific tit for tat feedback as such. So I observed it definitely takes leadership and mindset to be able to do that, because you've got to have the courage, like you did, to be able to open up and to be expecting anything to come back in terms of feedback. But then also what I observed from those conversations, because you spent the time to have those, there was opportunities that came off the back of those conversations that perhaps might have not happened. You took the time, invested in the strategy process, and opportunities came off the back of that as well, which is
very
brilliant.
much.
In terms of the iterative process, talking both with staff leadership internally and then stakeholders externally, did you find that opening up to a very broad conversation as opposed to a very formal structured interview process was helpful? Did you feel that dynamic helped kind of flesh out some really unique insights, both externally and internally?
Look, when you're engaging with people, you always have to be mindful of the power verticals, right? The any differentiation in your power. As a CEO, you talk to a staff member and you say, "Tell me what you think."
Yes.
I've been a staff member. I remember what it feels like when someone who's multiple rungs above you in an organization asks you a direct question. You immediately go, "What are the consequences of being honest? How honest do I be? How can it is a threatening situation."
Certainly
And so in a way, one reason to open it up and have a more workshopy, discussive kind of style is to alleviate some of those fears, and to fear like the eye of Sauron is on you as an employee, or whoever happens to be the person. I mean, the same goes to board members. Not everyone wants to be collared by a CEO and say, tell me what you honestly think about life, the universe, and everything, right? So a more open and engaging staff, and people. I mean, think about our own staff or even council workshops with all the doctors. People really got into the mood.
Yes.
And by the time we were halfway through the day, a lot more ideas started going.
Absolutely.
And when people weren't, put down for providing what might be considered negative or feedback or criticism, they got kind of going. But in the process of going, they gave more creative ideas.
True.
Right.
True. Do you think that, I think the AMA has a unique perspective because you're here as a federal organisation, you're here in the heart of Canberra. You see the federal government lens, and for a lot of people outside Canberra, it's a bit mysterious in terms of how it all operates. So you see it from a broad government perspective.
Yes.
You see it from a very community and a social community perspective.
Yes.
And then everything in between.
Yes.
And I think strategy, from what I observe, trying to split those things into different worlds is becoming less and less. Society, community, government policy needs to be even more intertwined to really understand those nuances. And I think the AMA has quite a unique position in that sort of things.
I think, to me, a lot of this speaks to the importance of internal consistency. We as an organisation have been around for a long time. So the AMA of 50 years ago is not the AMA of now. But what is critical is you understand your strengths, and the AMA's advocacy, both in the media and with governments, is its core strength. So how do you strengthen the core strength? You never take it for granted. Our other core strength is how many doctors are AMA members. There are thousands and thousands across the country, and their engagement with us is critical to our success because they give us effectively the mandate for the work we do. But if you want to be an organisation that succeeds, it's important that inside and outside you're consistent, that there is no kind of strange dissonance, that turning off staff because you say one thing and do another. Everyone wants to do a good job working for a good organisation, and at the end of the day feel like they helped society in which they live. So to me, again, the strategic process is about aligning our super strengths like advocacy and our internal language and stories we tell ourselves about the organisation, and making sure that we have that consistency throughout that's aligned with our ethos.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to look at it, because often predictability and consistency can be separated from the creative and the human side. But what I'm hearing and what I observed as part of the process, there was a consistent process, different voices as inputs into the process,
Yes.
which then, in a sense, it's kind of a strange conundrum. There's more predictability in the outcome because you've spent the time in listening to all those different perspectives.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting point.
And as CEO, you still drive. Back to your original question about drive versus consultation. As CEO, you're still putting forward the ultimate drafts of the strategy, the thrust, because there is lots of things discussed, but someone needs to synthesize it into what a workable direction would be. But again, taking that as an iterative process, not saying this is my take on everything and here's my perspective, but really taking the time to then morph your ideas to make sure that you do retain the strengths, harness the opportunities, and patch where you think there are problems. That I think is a real strength of a process rather than a one-off exercise.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. When we look at the impact of your leadership, of what I've observed, certainly some of that, the open strategy process and all the other really good aspects from a cultural point of view. Is there one or two things that stand out as an output? Obviously, you're still working on your strategy. Is there one or two things that stand out that kind of came throughout the process that was quite insightful that you saw a bit differently at the end of the process?
A couple of things. Firstly, I think the process itself, in the last year and a half, we had some tremendous successes as an organization, and we had some unprecedented challenges. And this is both internally and externally in our advocacy. And I think having the strategic process run in parallel with some of the highs and the lows gave a sense of comfort and consistency to particularly staff, but also to the board, to say, we are focusing on what the future will look like. We can take the wins and we can take the losses, and we can still chart a way forward from a culture and trust and hope perspective. These are really important elements, back to the people being at the heart of this. In terms of the actual strategy, there were quite a few elements that where we started and where we ended were not the same thing because the process really enriched it. A great example was the way we conceptualized ourselves as an organization, the way we described our services. We were very much always talking about doctors, which is important. But as part of this process, we clearly identified that we work with doctors as individuals, some as practice owners. We also talk at community level and at broader health system level. And these four interact. And it was so important to identify them because they're all equally important, but affect our work differently. And that was an insight the organization didn't have about itself before we went through this process.
That's brilliant. I think it is so easy to sometimes, in many different organisational settings, to kind of miss some of the strategic pillars you have because you're either focused on, internally, rightfully so, or externally. So spending the time to actually say, what is really our key value here? And that doesn't happen overnight, doesn't it? So, and you've talked about through the process, those conversations as part of it.
Well, and as humans, we're really wired to worry about the negative. So your mind's eye constantly zooms into the problems to be fixed. Whereas a strategy is meant to be a process of recognizing your strengths as well as opportunities, no matter how difficult and enticing the problems you're trying to fix are. And again, having a process to work through, make sure you do both.
Absolutely. So Natalia, there's obviously a degree of uncertainty in a lot of the industries, a lot of external environments, economies locally and globally. We see the open strategy process and leaders such as yourself with a mindset of being comfortable with a mindset of we might not have the answers from day one. When you're looking at uncertainty from a CEO leadership perspective and also the open strategy process, has that, do you think, helped you navigate through some of that, both now and potentially into the future?
I think when you're a junior staff member, you start in an organization, you get maybe a job description, maybe a position manual, someone kind talks you through the tasks, and your world is very certain because you don't worry about the organizational budget or performance, you don't necessarily understand who makes what decisions. Your role protects you and gives you absolute and complete certainty. The more senior you get in the organization, the less the degree of certainty you have. By the time you reach a CEO, you know in your heart as CEO that you're making things up. The world is an uncertain place, and you're exercising a greater degree of judgment to set a direction.
It's very refreshing to hear.
Now, you're working with your board, you're working with your senior leadership team, whatever resources you've got at hand, to break that uncertainty into certainties. And a strategic plan is your key pivotal, tag point, because it allows you to say, if all this sea of uncertainty is true, and some of our assumptions pan out, these are the core areas and directions in which we need to invest our time and resources to make sure we're still successful in 3 years' time. Now, the open strategy process allows you to communicate a little bit more of the uncertainty to people throughout the organization, but in a way that feels controlled and comforting. But that's a cultural change, because when you as a staff member have visibility to some of the uncertainties and challenges of management, particularly if tough decisions need to be made, you feel a little bit more empathy because you understand. Similarly, if you're a senior leader and you know that the board is making certain decisions, they know the world is uncertain, but if you understand the process through which the board and the CEO are going through to make those calls, and they're based on pre-agreed strategic vision, it allows you to be at peace with the decisions that are being made, or more at peace. So to me, firstly, it's our job as leaders to take uncertainty and acknowledge it, let it sit and be comfortable with it, and then convert it into something our senior leaders and our staff and our members can live with and work with. And it also is a process in which you can perhaps explain the mystery of what a CEO does day to day to other people in the organization. So it is, I think, a very empowering process. And it also allows you to convert something that's very destabilizing, which is this sense of not knowing what the future brings, into a process that feels shared and reassuring.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful way to describe it. I think that being comfortable with the uncertainty at that level is so key, isn't it? And I suppose as people grow in their careers, you become a bit more, but it's never really comfortable, is it, at any level?
No.
And I think to acknowledge that is huge, because there's not enough conversation about that in my view. So I think that's really refreshing to hear. And to wrap up, when we look at other CEOs, your peers, other people in the health sector and broader, is there any things that are front of mind, or any advice, from your own career that has really helped you perhaps lean into that uncertainty, both now and into the future? The pace of change is speeding up, which speaks to that broader uncertainty. Is there any aspects that you'd like to share from what's been helpful from your perspective?
Look, I wouldn't dare give advice, because we're all muddling the best we can through the uncertain world.
Yeah.
I just would say that from what I've observed, particularly at senior and CEO levels, I really hope more people feel confident to admit that they don't know the answers, but they know the right questions to ask, and resist the pressure to be the genius in the room with all the answers to everything, which so many CEOs face, particularly with their boards, putting what one might call unrealistic expectations on them. The best relationships you can have is where everyone understands both their roles, their limitations, and yet you can agree that you will go through a process and find the right answers that are meaningful. Now, that takes a lot of grit, and it takes a lot of self-confidence.
It certainly does.
And I just want to wish, my peers and people coming through the ranks that knowledge of self-worth and the confidence to hold your own and not jump into the obvious answers without asking the questions first.
That is so helpful. I think the way you described that, having the grit and the courage to do that. And I think for other inspiring leaders to be CEOs, for them to hear that and to understand that is actually the process, and that is what real leadership is in a strategy and open context, I think is really valuable.
Yes.
So thank you so much for sharing your insights today, Natalia, and we'll hopefully look forward to catching up again soon.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Always fun.